One of my favorite books in the world. Actually, I'm going to have to say it's my favorite nonfiction book is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. However, I know that it can be really hard to process and implement into your life, especially when you're first reading it. And so what I am going to do over a series of 6 videos is share with you what I think is the most important aspect of each chapter and share with you how you can begin to implement those into your life. So the very first video, this one right here, is going to be about chapter 1. But before we get into chapter 1 itself, I want to talk about a couple of things that I hear quite frequently about the 4 agreements. And I think once you have an understanding of these 2 things, it will really help you in how you approach the book. So the first one, and I hear this a lot, is this is common sense. This is easy. This isn't that big of a deal. But here's the thing. Is it common sense? Sure. The 4 agreements make sense. Nobody walks away going, oh, wow, that was revolutionary. But the reason the book actually is revolutionary is in the applying the book. So you might hear, don't take things personally, and you go, well, yeah. But then actually making that a part of your life is a very different story. And that is where the beauty of the book is taking these seemingly simple concepts and actually applying them to your life. I have to tell you, when I'm working one-on-one with a client or when I get a question, it is absolutely amazing how many times the answer to the problem is actually found in one of the 4 agreements. So don't blow it off because it's a simple book. The magic happens in applying it to your life. Which brings me to the second point that I want to talk about with this particular book, is that the second most frequent question I get about it is, okay, but how do I do that? So these are concepts that are simple, but they're not always easy to apply, especially when we're first starting out and we're really stuck in our own minds about the way that things should be, the reasons that we're doing things. And so the purpose of this series of videos is to provide you the how, to tell you what I think is the best way to approach it, how I have approached it, and open a dialogue about how to allow the magic of this book to transform your life. So I want to share my history with the book so you understand where I'm coming from. So I first read it approximately 15 years ago, and 100% honest truth, I didn't like it. In fact, I got rid of it. So if I love a book, I consider it a lifer. It goes onto a separate shelf. Everything else gets recycled back into the system. And if I have checked it out from a library and it's a lifer book, I will go buy it to add to my library. So I have it. So the first time I read it, no interest whatsoever. And then about 6-7 years later, I was going through a really hard time in life, and my coach at that time required me to read it. I fought it tooth and nail. I was like, nope, don't want to do this. And she said, you need to read this. You have to. And so I read it, and totally different perspective. And now, since that point, I've lost track of how many times I've read it, and what I do is I actually keep it next to my journal station. So when I am stuck on something and I can't figure it out, I will literally grab the book, open to a random page, and start reading, and am absolutely shocked at how many times it answers my problem. So I went from hating it to absolutely loving it. I have seen him talk live in person. He led one of the best meditations I've ever had and is just an amazing, calming soul. And, you know, I think the lesson I want you to take from my story is we get what we need at the moment that we need it. It resonates the moment that we need it. So just because something didn't make sense or wasn't applicable at one point in your life doesn't mean it is today. We're presented with the lessons that we need to learn in the moment. And so if for some reason this book is calling to you, or you've been repetitively told many times and the synchronicity is just flowing into you, accept that no matter how hard the book is to get through for some, it is time for you to process it. All right, so let's dive into the goods. Chapter 1. Now, chapter 1 has a lot in it. A lot. You can get stuck at this point, and I've had a lot of people actually stop reading at that point because it's too much. But chapter 1 is the foundation of everything that will help you with the rest of the book. So really stick with chapter 1 and understand that these are concepts that you're probably going to have to go back to. Chapter 1 isn't the quick, easy part of the book. The rest of the book is, but the first chapter isn't. In fact, when I had my son read it, yes, I had my son read this book in 6th grade, that was the chapter that he struggled with the absolute most. It took us the longest to get through chapter 1. But once we were through chapter 1, he actually flew through the rest of the book amazingly fast, and now he's a sophomore, and he constantly will say to me, "But Mom, aren't you making an assumption?" So be careful what you teach your kids. Side point. But know that this has a lot of information in it, and it is foundational, so allow yourself the time to process it. So I have 6 key takeaways that I think are really critical on your personal development, spiritual growth journey that come from this chapter. And the very first one is the idea of words and knowledge being agreed upon by society, by our groups that we live in. Now, I have to say, in addition to him talking about this, my angel guides, my spirit team, whatever you want to call them, are constantly bringing this point up to me, constantly reminding me of this particular idea. And the idea is the only reason that anything has a name that we agree upon is because we've agreed upon it. We agreed a tree is a tree. But, if somebody is just born and never told that's what a tree is, maybe they call it a hornswoggle. It's only something because we agree to it. Now, this goes not just for the words we use, but also the knowledge and the information that we are given. So as a family unit, we agree upon a certain set of beliefs, and they're true to us because that's what we have been told. We agree upon this. And this is really critical in understanding all of this, because what you need to take away from it is that every single belief that our society has is because we as a group have agreed with it. That doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's right for you. Maybe you were brought up in one set of beliefs and your true soul actually wants to be over here in this set of beliefs. And so that is very critical to understand, that just because we've agreed on something doesn't make it right for you. So keep that in mind. Now, the number 2 thing, as I put up 4 fingers, the number 2 thing is the talk about domestication. And domestication is that process of us believing what we've been told, agreeing into those agreements. So here's how it works. We are told one thing, or we experience something as a child. And because as a child, we need our needs met for us. Not only emotionally, but physically. Our shelter, our food comes from somebody else. And so we believe a lot of what is told to us because we need to, because that makes us safe. This starts in our home of origin, and then as we get older, expands into our schools and our friends and everybody that we interact with. And what happens is not only do we believe what we're told, so you need to believe XYZ, but as our child mind is processing things, it creates beliefs of its own. So let's say you had a parent who had a bad day and yelled. 5-year-old you is going to process that one way and create a belief around it. And so you're creating these beliefs and agreements to go along with your family and your society to stay safe. And you do this throughout time. So you're making these at 5, 8, 10, 12, 15, and going through. Now, here's the thing about this. If you were to ask 40-year-old you, hey, this is what happened, how do you think you should react? It's going to be very different than what 5-year-old you would have said. The problem with this is you're still functioning on what 5-year-old you took as the truth, not what current you is truly assessing as truth. And this is domestication. So then to take it a step further, as we are accepting these beliefs and having these ideas settle into our heads, we then get to a stage where we self-regulate. So instead of getting in trouble from mom and dad or the teacher or our siblings, we now punish ourselves. And he refers to it as basically self-domestication. You now domesticate yourself based on this premise of what you have been told. And in this process, you leave your true self. You leave the core of who you were born into this earth as. Now, I don't know if we call this good news or not, but the good news is this happens to everybody. So you are not alone in this. It is happening to me, to you, to everybody around us. It is part of being born and growing up in a society. So don't think this is you being, narrowed out, oh, it's that person right there, we got to domesticate. Every single one of us is, including those that are domesticating us. So our parents are giving us these beliefs and ideas and saying these things based on how they were domesticated, unless they've done the work to get out. Okay, so that leads us to the third thing that is really critical with chapter 1. And that is that part where I said we do eventually self-enforce. So we create what he refers to as the book of law. These are the rules I must follow. And then we have our own internal judge. And so we have a judge, we break a law, our judge goes, bad, you are going to be punished. And they give us a punishment. And then the victim in us says, oh, I can't believe I got punished. And this cycle repeats absolutely endlessly. So it is, I've agreed upon this law, I'm going to punish myself, but then I'm going to play victim with myself too. And that is where we get stuck in our beliefs and our habits and our patterns because we can't break that cycle. Now, the fourth thing that I think is really critical to take away from this chapter is that our biggest fear is the fear of being alive. Our biggest fear is that our true self will be shown, that we will be exactly who we're meant to be. Now, why is this our biggest fear? It's our biggest fear because we created these beliefs based on the idea that we had to survive. So by becoming our true selves and letting everybody see who we are, in our subconscious, we are running the risk of being abandoned, of not taken care of. So even though now we are adults and can fend for ourselves, we still face these fears because they were created at a point where we need help. So remember that all of this was created when you were young. So 5-year-old you is controlling you now because they're scared they're not going to be fed or they're not going to be sheltered or whatever the need was in that moment. And so becoming alive, being free of that old stuff is our biggest fear. All right, the fifth thing that I want to talk about is the concept of perfection. We create perfection in our minds based upon the rules that we've established. So if you go back to the whole domestication process and then us coming to a point where we are self-enforcing, we have created this level of expectations in our head, and that becomes our idea of perfection. And so perfection is completely and 100% made up in our minds based upon what we agreed with society is. So perfection is absolutely false. And I know this is a really hard thing to get over because I am a recovering perfectionist. And so when I do get stuck into it, I have to come back to this idea that perfection isn't real. It's created in my mind, even to the point that perfection is different for every single person. My idea of perfection is very different than your idea of perfection because it's all based in the agreements that you and I made with ourselves to fit into our families. So remember, perfection is a construct that we make in our own minds, and that simply doesn't exist. And then the final thing that I want to talk about in this chapter is the concept of self-abuse, where you will only allow yourself to be treated as poorly as you would treat yourself. I would like to expand the idea of abuse that we talk about, because I think a lot of people instantly think, oh, I wasn't abused, I was loved. But abuse is more than like just a physical abuse. It's very emotional. As a society, we actually tend to ignore emotional abuse. And from my perspective and my experience, that's where most of it lies. And more of us have been emotionally abused than we actually realize. And so what you have to kind of look at from this, and the way I take this idea, is that the more that you love yourself, the more that you heal, the more that you come to terms with the beliefs that you have created within yourself, the less you will tolerate. So if somebody is treating you bad and you keep saying, why won't they do this? Why won't they do that? Why? You actually need to flip it and say, okay, well, why am I accepting this? Because you're only going to accept what you would do for yourself. The second they step over that line, then you go, oh, no, I'm not going to stand for that. So when looking at how others treat you, instead of going, woe is me, why is he always doing this? Stop and say, well, why am I allowing this? Okay, so those are the 6 takeaways that I think are really important. So now, how do we actually apply this? How do we begin to understand this so we can complete the rest of the book? The first thing is to use chapter 1 as the foundation to retrain your beliefs about why you are where you're at. It can be very easy in emotional healing work to blame yourself or think it's just you, to think you're alone, to think you're broken. But when you use what he is teaching in chapter 1, it allows you to look at this as a natural process. Every single one of us become domesticated. Every single one of us agree to things that aren't necessarily our truth. Every single one of us needs to go through this process in life where we determine what is right for us and what is right for others. This is a 100% natural process. So understanding the concepts that he's teaching in chapter 1 will allow you to make these changes in your life with less self-judgment, less self-abuse. It allows you to really begin to shift your beliefs to healthier beliefs. So now, how do you do this? And what should you start doing after chapter 1, before and during jumping into chapter 2? So the first thing that I actually would recommend is get his copy of the companion book. Now, full honesty here, I haven't read the whole thing. I kind of pop in and use it when I'm stuck on something, but it has journal prompts and question and answers and just kind of information to help get you through those areas. For me, the most beneficial thing that I found in that book was the idea of starting your own book of law. And so what you're going to do is create a written document or a written book, and I'll show you mine here in a minute, that has all these agreements that you have. So what I did was I got this little tiny journal. I got these on Amazon. I will put the link in the comments below. And then as you can it's probably hard to see, but I have all these little paper clips in it. And so each section, and I used to literally carry this in my purse. So there's an agreement page of what I believe about my body and myself, and an agreement page of families and friends, and then an agreement page of life and God, and finally work and career. And what I would do is, as I realized I was having a belief or an agreement come up, I would write it in here. And then this became what I worked through. So I'll read you a couple examples so you can get the idea of what this might look like. So in my working career, one of them was, you have to work long, hard hours to be successful. And also, I have to utilize every minute of every day with something productive. Yes, I was a bit of a workaholic up until about 5-6 years ago, and I still struggle with it. And that is because I come from a long history of being a farm family. So while I didn't grow up on the farm, my mom did. And obviously all my aunts and uncles, and we all lived around each other, and it was taught work, 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 work. And so those were and still are things that I'm really kind of working through. So what this book is going to allow you to do is remind yourself that that was something you agreed to that might not actually be healthy or the truth, and keep in mind before you. So that's what I would do. Now, next week, I am going to put out my chapter 2 study guide, opinions, and information. So if you want to make sure that you're notified, click subscribe. If this video was helpful to you, I would love it if you would click like. And if you have questions, comments, or anything like that, drop it in the comment section below and I will get back with you. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today.